Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies and TV shows. My name's Al Horner, and today on the show, something sinister simmers beneath the surface of suburbia in a brilliant, festive-themed psychological thriller. Eileen is a tale about pent-up desire, parental neglect, and escaping the shackles of the life expected of us. It's a story that first existed as a novel, launching the literary career of Boston-born author Ottessa Moshfegh in 2015. Since then, Ottessa's career has skyrocketed, with novels like Lapvona and the tremendous My Year of Rest and Relaxation cementing her reputation as one of her generation's most exciting voices. Or as the fantastic Jia Tolentino once described her, easily the most interesting contemporary American writer on the subject of being alive when being alive feels terrible. Across all the intervening years and subsequent success, the character of Eileen, a secretary at a correctional facility for teenage boys in a small American town, has never quite left Ottessa's side. And it really shows in the new film adaptation of her story that she wrote with Luke Goebel, her husband and her screenwriting partner. The movie, directed by William Oldroyd, stars Thomasin McKenzie as Eileen and Anne Hathaway as the older woman, Rebecca, that she becomes enchanted by. The closer they get though, the closer Eileen gets to a dark truth involving one of the young inmates at the prison where she works. On this week's episode, Ottessa and Luke take time out of a recent trip to London to break down their screenplay for the film, taking us inside the mind of the film's fascinating Hitchcockian anti-hero. Ottessa recounts the parts of herself that she left on the page when she initially wrote the story, while Luke, who's a great author in his own right, unravels the meaning of key scenes as he sees them. We also crucially debate whether the festive backdrop of this film, all snow and fairy lights, makes this a Christmas movie. This is a spoiler conversation, of course, so please do be sure to check out the movie in cinemas now before tuning in. A huge thanks to Ottessa and Luke for being such fantastic guests, and a massive thank you, as ever, to our Patreon supporters who help make this episode possible. If you like what we do on this show and want to see us continue to grow, you can support us for the price of a single monthly cup of coffee. And in return, you'll get all sorts of perks, including ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, and the chance to ask your questions to upcoming guests. The address, in case you're interested, is patreon.com/scriptapart. Okay, with that all out the way, let's jump in. This is the fantastic Ottessa Moshfegh and Luke Goebel discussing the first draft secrets of Eileen. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demet.
So I guess I'll start with the tinseled covered elephant in the room because I can feel the debate about to rage, guys. Is Eileen a Christmas movie? It feels like this is destined for a kind of Die Hard-esque back and forth about whether this constitutes a festive movie or not.
I think it's the Christmas movie to end all Christmas movies. I don't know about you, but being at home for the holidays and watching Christmas movies always felt sort of sort of shameful horror that my family wasn't the perfect family. And I think Eileen is sort of the antidote to that because her family is so imperfect and the story is so not about finding community and togetherness, but rather finding your own way through hell to get to a life that you want and finding agency and, all of the things that I desperately wanted as a young woman. So, it is a Christmas story. There's some Christmas cheer. There's some Christmas parties. There's a Christmas angel.
Vomit. There is.
There are a lot of drinks and snow. So I think, this could be a great thing to watch when, you've come home from Christmas dinner and you're a little bit like, oh, I cannot stand my mother. Maybe.
This is like the Christmas movie to celebrate the god of Pulp Fiction. The like vengeful god, the Samuel Jackson's god. You know, it's like it's full of good messages.
But it's also, you know, I think it delivers a lot of the things that you want in a Christmas movie. In that it's super entertaining, it's suspenseful, and at the end, the protagonist has gotten what she wanted, right?
And killed the bad guy.
Yeah.
Basically. Just like happens in Elf, like... to the best version. Well, Christmas movie or not, guys, Eileen is such a riveting watch that kind of represents something of a full circle moment for the character and this story. Like, I know the novel was in part inspired by Hitchcock movies, hence the character named Rebecca.
Yep.
Now it's become a Hitchcockian movie thriller in its own regard. From the moment you wrote the novel, Ottessa, and from the moment that you first read it, Luke, did you both see the cinematic potential of the story, the ways in which it might lend itself to the big screen?
I want to hear Luke answer that question because he came at it fresh. You know, like I had to build it from the ground up, and it was always a novel in its construction. But I'm curious what you thought when you read it for the first time.
Yeah, I'd say yes. I mean, definitely had all the right cinematic cards. You could get distracted from that by the like eloquence and the brilliance of the first person voice, and never imagined it in a film with voiceover. So just being so taken by that first person experience, you could kind of forget that this could be an objective, you know, utterly captivating suspense thriller that it is. So I guess yes, definitely.
And Hitchcock was, of course, a filmmaker who occasionally would revisit his own stories that he wrote decades before. So, of course, in 1956, he remade 1934's The Man Who Knew Too Much. I'm always fascinated when storytellers do that because often they kind of remark upon finding themselves kind of approaching that old material in a different way because years have passed and they've grown. Was that the case for you at all, Ottessa? Like when you sat down with Luke to write this adaptation, did you find yourself with any new perspective on the character, or was it like being reacquainted with an old friend exactly as you remembered them?
I mean, it was pretty exact, to be honest. At least it was in my own mind. A lot of time had passed since I'd written the book, and I'd also had this experience of releasing the book and then living with the Eileen as she existed in the minds of readers. So I really wasn't Eileen. I didn't inhabit her mind in the way that I did when I was writing the novel. I could see her more like from Luke's perspective as an objective character who was not me. But I think because of that, I was able to imagine her moving around in space in a different way. And when we sat down to work on just the story for the screenplay, she came as a character who could really occupy this really boiled down, concentrated narrative. Whereas in the novel, you know, she takes a lot of time to distract us from the story, to give us backstory, to tell us what she's thinking and feeling, what she's imagining, what she wants, you know, scenarios that didn't happen but could have, all that kind of stuff. And in the novel, we're really there with her just in that present moment. So she felt all the more vulnerable to me in the script.
I mean, you mentioned there how, you know, you inhabited the character as you wrote. Like the destructive relationships with alcohol in the novel, you've kind of previously described as being informed by like this 5-year period in your own life. And, you know, some of the issues around eating as well, you've talked about in the past, kind of mirroring things that you've gone through, Ottessa. People also talk about writing as like a means of holding up a mirror to yourself as you write, but from the sounds of things, you do that literally. I read that you have like a mirror that you sometimes position behind your laptop as a way of kind of getting these little glimpses of yourself that can inform what you're doing on the page. Talk me through like just how personal an experience it was way back when you were writing this, and the degree to which you were fusing together with the character to any degree that you were.
Wow, you've really done your research, Al. I don't write in front of a mirror anymore, but I did for a very long time. Yeah, I mean, I feel like any creative act, especially in storytelling, it's almost impossible for it not to be a reflection of, if not you, your obsessions, you know? I mean, what am I going to write about? The thing that I think about the most, like I could try not to, but it's going to come out anyway. One way or another, it's going to be about me and what's happening in my life. And when I was writing Eileen, I was very much tangibly dealing with sort of the person I had become, having used certain coping mechanisms like an eating disorder, addictions, to get me through hard times. And what I had missed out on learning because of those crutches. And so I was thinking about my own immaturity a lot. I was thinking back to my own adolescence, where these habits and tendencies were sort of born, and a time in my life where I was coming into the consciousness of self, really, you know, figuring out this is who I am and this is how I'm different from everyone else. And I really wanted to write a character who was having those same sort of feelings. Of course, I wasn't going to have her living my incredibly boring life, going to school every day and, you know, like walking home in the snow. She needed to have like a exciting story so that she could have basically like a whole lifetime's experience in being born into her future. And that's really where Rebecca came in, you know?
Yeah, so in the novel, I think, what's the phrase? I think Eileen describes her as my ticket to a new life.
Yes.
Maybe Luke, this is a good one as someone who was coming fresh to it. Maybe you can answer this. Like, what do those words mean to you? What was it about who Eileen was before Rebecca turns up and who Rebecca enables her to be?
Yeah, that's a really exciting, a good question. I guess what Ottessa was just saying about those addictions and behaviors, I share some of those, and coming to it, or I had in my past, and coming to the work, there's this certain relatability to the thing that underlies the disorders of, drinking too much or whatever it is, addictions that I could really relate to, and that I can see, like I connect to Eileen in all of the ways that she is relatably maladaptive, or has, like unhealthy responses, or has too much feeling for her body, for her and mind, for where she's at. Like she's, like operating at way too high of an intensity. And so I see her encountering Rebecca as this like really interesting liminal space that brings up like a lot of questions around queerness that are coming up around the film, and that I think are really interesting, because it's like, does Rebecca have affection and infatuation with Eileen, or is Rebecca using Eileen? How does power work in those kind of attractions? What is Eileen looking for from Rebecca? Is it sexual? Is it sexual and the opportunity to become someone else? I think that immediately upon seeing Rebecca, she sees this sounding board, this mirror of like, how can I become what I'm not, that I'm seeing in this person who's carrying something that no one around me has ever carried.
Right.
And I think that like immediate attraction and that possible confusion, I think that question of like, what is this? Is this a sexual attraction? Is this a liminal space, an opportunity to become something new, is like fascinating, especially as I think a lot of young people find those kind of relationships in their 20s, these kind of like narcissistic twinships or whatever they are, where it's like you want to be them, you want to be with them, you want to change who you are. So yeah.
I love like the ambiguity that's intact in the film, like around those questions that you just mentioned. Like often in the translation from page to screen, Hollywood does have a tendency to yank away some of that ambiguity. It also has a tendency to kind of sand down some of the quote unquote unlikable traits of a character. I believe the rights to the novel were first sold like prior to publication, the movie rights. So, and then for a while, this was a project in the hands of other filmmakers.
Yes.
Did you guys have to battle to retain that ambiguity and a lot of the nuance of the story? Was there ever kind of like much in the way of like a battle to be waged over that to make sure that this version of Eileen that's now coming to the screen was going to be a faithful adaptation?
We were so lucky.
Well, we were lucky in that there had been a project in development, but then it kind of fell apart. And so I got the rights back, and we never even looked at what someone else had done. We got really lucky. We sat down with Will Oldroyd, our director, kind of like showed up like, like he was like, oh, hey, let's do Eileen. And we're like, oh my God. And then we all had a meeting, and it just seemed like this incredible coming together of a shared vision and
shared sensibilities
Yes.
of like daring and respect and mischief. There was just a common sense.
I mean, I think we were all just so excited to see a character like Eileen who could be someone who we would enjoy watching her break the rules. You know, we would be rooting for her, also a little bit perturbed by her and worried for her and about her. It was just an exciting character. And you know what? It's true. When I wrote the book, I understood completely that the line between platonic and romantic, especially when you're, in your 20s, is very blurry. It can be. I mean, I've definitely felt like I was in love with my girlfriends, and I'm completely heterosexual, By the way, I should mention that Luke Goebel is also my husband. We've been married for 5 years. And so it was interesting to think about the kind of infatuation that you have with a friend like that that's going to completely change your life, because that is, in a way, what we had with each other when we met. I mean, it was sort of undeniable. But yeah, I mean, to get back to your question, I don't think we really had to fight for anything, because we were sort of just boots on the ground doing it, just the three of us at the beginning. And then the script was its script. And
it was COVID. I don't know if that has to do with anything other than...
we were hiding in a cave and nobody knew what we were doing.
You were being chased by wildfires, right?
That did happen. I mean, and we could talk about that, but just, I mean, Will was willing to not go to to the route of getting a studio to pay us. And so we did it, what they call SPAC. And so we had total control. And by the time we went to Likely Story, they were very user-friendly for art, artists wanting to do what artists want to do. And then fifth season came and it just really was...
It was an independent
magical
movie.
experience. Yeah. It was an independent film with actors and directors that all wanted to make this movie, and no one really, put their fingers in it.
Love to hear it. So guys, let's go through some of the beats from the film and maybe talk about some of the ways in which there are some subtle departures from the novel. There are some tweaks. The first of which being the kind of framing device of the novel. We begin in the novel with the sort of old Eileen looking back,
right.
You're reflecting on this period decades earlier. That was something you sort of left behind, and we sort of dive straight into the film in this movie adaptation. Can you talk me through that?
Yeah, why'd you do that?
I mean, that just seemed like an obvious. It seemed totally crucial to any adaptation of this story that it would not be framed by an older Eileen, but one that was framed by, Eileen herself in the moment, so that we could see why and how she responded to her life in real time.
Yeah, I mean, like we said earlier, these are really condensed versions of the characters from the film in a lot of ways. This was inspired in the Hitchcockian sense. These are grand characters that are distilled. And I think we couldn't have done it that way without voiceover. or at least that would have been the obvious. And I don't think we didn't want voiceover in this film because we wanted the only person Eileen can talk to be Rebecca. Like, there's a lot of silence in Mackenzie's performance because what in the book is so much first person thinking and talking directly to us in the film is all done on the face. And so that kind of silence and that repression and that environment of the 1964 cold New England winter, working class town, that hardness explodes or opens when she meets Rebecca. It's the first person that she can talk to. So if she were talking to us in the beginning, it would lose that magic.
Yeah, the cat's kind of out of the bag if she's already talking to us.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned the setting there. This is another of your stories, Ottessa, that kind of it opts for a backdrop that isn't modern. My Year of Rest was set in the year 2000. You've visited medieval farmland in your work before, and I think it's 1964. I think is the year of this story. Can you talk to me about the ways in which the time period dovetailed with what Eileen's experiencing? Why that felt like a fitting backdrop for this tale that I guess theoretically could have been told in modern day, and the kind of exfil setting of this. I'm kind of fascinated by the environment that you chose to tell this story in.
Well, I grew up in a suburb of Boston. When I was growing up, my aunt's family lived on the shore in Massachusetts. And so, every several weeks we would all get into the car and do this drive out there. And for some reason, it was always winter. All of my memories from growing up are winter. And driving through these small towns that, didn't exist until I saw them. They're just so out of the way. I was always sort of terrified. This was sort of a horrific landscape of secrets to me. It was totally foreign, yet it looked like it had always been there. And I always wanted to know, what are those people doing inside those houses? They were the big mystery to me. And 1964, yes, it's an important year. A lot happened in the United States in 1964. It was an inflection point culturally, politically. Women were about to really shift in the way they took up space and were respected as human beings and 50% of the population. But in those small New England towns, it was not 1964. It was still not 1964 in the 80s when I was a kid driving through them. It really looked like the 1950s, and still to this day you drive through and, the cars are different, but the mailbox is still the same, these pretty little cute colonial houses. It's a sort of timeless, weird, liminal, to use Luke's word, space where you just, is anything happening ever? And then obviously there's stuff happening. People are living and dying. People are getting together and breaking up. A lot. So I really loved 1964 as this moment on the brink, and that Rebecca represented that, yes, things are changing out there in the rest of the world. You could have that too, Eileen. And I love that it's just a moment of potential and possibility, and also so perfect for a young woman who really wants to get away. I think that was maybe the primary feeling I had when I was a teenager was I can't wait to get away from here and start my life. And I think that's sort of what Eileen and that time in that town is about.
It's a good way to say it, what you were talking about. Is it a Christmas movie? It's a Christmas movie for a young woman who wants to get away.
Yeah, I can't wait to get out of here.
The early scenes involving the dad are so fascinating. It's a really nuanced situation, the relationship between those two. Eileen is part caregiver. She's part kind of prisoner almost of him. Can you talk me through that relationship and what you guys think. What you guys think that relationship exacerbates in Eileen's attraction to Rebecca, because it's such a kind of demure, put down life that she lives with her dad.
What do you think, Luke?
I think it's a great question. I almost want to hear more about what you're thinking. Like, how does her relationship with her dad set her up for the experience she has when she sees Rebecca?
Well, for me, the interesting thing about it is the kind of like specter of the sister. So in the film, I don't think we ever see Joan. She's just mentioned in passing, and she's kind of put on this pedestal, and you feel so sorry for Eileen, and it really buys your affection for her because she's there doing the hard work, caregiving for her father who's drinking himself into an early grave. For me, it's like a fascinating dynamic, and I'd just love to know a bit more about where it came from. And
well, what you're lighting on is really interesting in terms of, I think, in terms of the mirrors that the book and film create, where like what's happening with Joni, we later learn, that dad has transgressed. We can assume that dad has transgressed in some way upon Joni based on the scene where she's driving him to the hospital and he gropes Eileen and calls her by her sister's name, which is then a parallel and a mirror to what's happening with Lee Polk, which gets into whole generations of trauma and abuse that are happening in this film, everywhere from war and, physical and emotional abuse to sexual abuse. So all of that, I think, is really fascinating. How does that work with Rebecca? Can I tee that up to you?
Sure. Is that the tea?
That's
right
the tea.
there?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, I think, what the answer to that question for me goes to the scene, and I guess this is the beginning of spoiling the movie for whoever's listening. But when Eileen goes to, quote unquote, Rebecca's house for a drink on Christmas, there's a moment where Rebecca demonstrates the freedom that she has living all alone in this house by screaming. And I really feel like when Rebecca screams like that, to me, it's like the scream that Eileen wants to let out the entire movie. And the screaming that she wants to let out at her dad, who's constantly putting her down. And the way that he puts her down is like this really playful cat and mouse game that is addicting in itself. Like, I want to watch them fuck with each other, basically, as much as possible whenever they're in the scene together, because he's pushing one way, she's pushing back. It's this really interesting dance that's also really sad for both of them. You can see their loneliness, and you can see how desperate they are to somehow have an upper hand, which is a bizarre thing to want in a relationship with your daughter and, with your dad. No, I'm in charge. No, I'm in charge. No, you're wrong and I'm right. And, the thing that's unspoken between them until the very end is that they're both still grieving the loss of Mrs. Dunlap, the mother and wife. And it is a movie of mirrors and ghosts, images, or these people that aren't there anymore, and what we're trying to make up for in the wake of that loss. So, I think that Rebecca gives Eileen, a way. To say that she gives her a way out is one thing, but to say that Rebecca is acknowledging and validating that Eileen's life sucks. That when she literally says in the scene in the bar, like, that's no life for a young lady. Mm-hmm. You need more than that. You can't be filling in for your dead mom for the rest of your life. And
literally, she's wearing her clothes.
Exactly. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a judgment on Eileen that Eileen is grateful for, because I think without it, she might have thought that was just her lot in life.
Yeah, Rebecca's the only character who treats Eileen as if she's not destined to be what they all treat her.
Exactly.
That she's never going to escape. That she's going to be just like the caretaker for her father, and probably then end up like her father in one way or another, drunk or stuck or
end up like the other secretaries at the prison. It's like, just wait, Eileen, you're going to be just like me one day. You know, it's like this, all of these potential destinies that just seem horrible.
Yeah. She's treating her like, of course you're not going to stay here. Of course you're not like them. Of course you're not a secretary. Don't say that about, she's, for whatever her reasons are, whether she really believes that about Eileen or whether it's just that's what she believes about women or that's what she believes about, who knows? I mean,
or is
she
that
wants Eileen to do something for her.
She thinks Eileen should want more.
Right.
But I think Rebecca really does see something in Eileen. I mean, there's arguments to be made that you could like see it both ways. Like Rebecca is this master manipulator who sees this young woman and her vulnerability and knows exactly how to seduce her into doing exactly what she wants. Or she's telling the truth and she's like, do you really think you're a normal person, Eileen? You're not. We know she's not.
Right.
We've seen her be not.
Clearly.
So we know that she has the potential to bust out.
But then it's also her job.
Like, it is
Rebecca
her job.
Does
She's
this for a living. She's a child psychologist, and Eileen is in delayed adolescence. And there's also the Timothy Leary of it all, because Rebecca studied under Leary, which is something I think we added to the film. But
it was always like the unwritten backstory for Rebecca is that she, was one of the first women in a graduating class to study at Harvard under Leary, who was teaching there at the time, whose ideas were, kind of wild. Right?
It is fascinating, though, that in a film about parental negligence to a degree, you've got that with Eileen's father, you've got that in the Lee Polk component of the plot. Rebecca is an older woman, and there's a parental element almost. She's teaching Eileen how to be a woman in ways that she doesn't yet have access to. Can you talk to me about how this all marries up in that amazing final scene, which is a little bit different from the book? Can you talk to me about that final scene on Christmas Day? The disguise of it all is really interesting. The way that you you're expecting this invitation to be kind of a sexual one, and you're anticipating this kind of romantic moment between Rebecca and Eileen, but of course something else completely different is happening. Talk to me about constructing this version of this conclusion to the story.
Well, this was the hard part, to be totally honest. I mean, what compels Eileen to go along with Rebecca's plan to somehow extract a confession from Mrs. Polk was tricky, because we don't have the unspoken thoughts of Eileen. We only have the present moment and the scene and the dialogue, and so there was a lot of debate. There was a lot of, let's try this, no, let's try that. And to be honest, it didn't really all come together until Anne Hathaway suggested, this one moment of dialogue, which we put at the door when Eileen's like, no, I'm leaving, forget this.
That's right.
I thought you liked me, and now you're telling me that I'm here for something else. I mean, it still gives me chills, that sort of betrayal. And
the line of dialogue where she's saying, I need you, I need you,
I need you, right. I need you to help, I need you.
Right.
And how that she buys into that, knowing that there's actually maybe a bigger prize at the end. It's bigger than Rebecca. It's her own power.
Yeah, and I think that scene, that moment, that sequence, that Annie's speech about needing a friend, needing her, is like a partner to the thing that I think was not confusing or difficult about writing that scene, which was just the kernel of how it would hurt for Eileen to go there expecting one thing, and to when she starts saying like, I want to talk about Lee Polk, and she's like, you do?
Right.
Like, what? And it's just this like devastating blow. Like, this has nothing to do with what I thought I was here for. Like, where are you taking me? And then it just so rapidly turns into a whole nother movie. And Eileen is just, ruined by it for this moment, and then picks herself back up in that moment where and Rebecca says, "I need you," and then she's like, "All right,
I know what to do.
I know what to do."
I mean, it's interesting too, because in that moment, Anne Hathaway's character is basically admitting that she's vulnerable,
right?
But Eileen, doesn't exploit her in the way that she's been taught and shown to exploit vulnerable people. Instead, she takes it on. She takes it on as a responsibility. Okay, you're right. I need to show up for you. And I think that's that's for me why I love Eileen, because she isn't using anyone.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually the
Christmas angel.
She is the Christmas angel. She's the one that's really fighting for the truth.
Yeah.
And isn't hiding from her own truth at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, just to keep bringing it around to that question, like, I do love this as a Christmas movie. Like, it feels like there's this vengeance and this justice and this coming together and this, like, healing and catharsis and love between these characters that isn't phony. Like, it's like, this is like the straight shit. Like, I don't know what God would think about this, but I like it.
Yeah.
Well, it makes it all the more, there's something more special about the fact that they don't run away together. There's that heartbreaking moment where Eileen is staring out the window for a car to come around the bend that's never going to arrive. Like, Rebecca has left her. And Eileen has to kind of emerge from this trauma on her own. And of course, in the novel, we have this coda in which we understand that Eileen went to New York and she renamed herself Lena, I believe it was. And that's something that you don't get into in the movie. You just kind of leave it on that shot, that highway shot of her in a truck hitchhiking, kind of disappearing down a highway. Can you talk to me about the decision here of where to leave the story and why not replicate that coda?
That's always the question at the end, how do you want to leave things? And I think we always wanted to hold on to the shock of the twist and reveal, and this sense of emptiness and possibility, rather than saying, let's wrap this story up and let you know that Eileen left and went on her way to have this other kind of life. I think the not knowing, but seeing her sort of move into the future on this highway, and just the symbolism of that, and as an image, felt much more appropriate.
And a little bit scary.
Yes.
Like we were saying, you love Eileen, that she does the right thing and that she's, cares for Rebecca, but she kind of fucks it up.
Well, okay.
She
also kills someone.
But 2 seconds later, you've got Anne Hathaway with blood all over, stuffing pills down, Mrs. Polk's mouth, and it's just oh shit!
It's an amazing scene.
And to Eileen with the gun right before she shoots her, I'm like, yeah, do it. But it's that part of me that's unhinged that makes me relate to her. That's yeah, do it. And then she does it, and it's oh wait. That's real. Yeah. So to have her a few minutes later out on the highway, where's Eileen going? It's kind of nice to know she's not just sitting in an apartment somewhere, having, calm reflections on her life. It's it could go anywhere from here.
Well, that phrase, that unhinged part of me, is so fascinating. It reminds me of a quote of yours, Ottessa, from a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. You described how my writing lets people scrape up against their own depravity, but at the same time it's very refined. It's like seeing Kate Moss take a shit. I really like that quote. And I think it is true, a lot of your writing, the sort of realness of the characters and how unapologetically raw these characters often are, we do have an opportunity to see some of our own depravity in some of the bits of ourselves that we don't, let the rest of the world see. What do you think this story and this character, Eileen, what do they let people scrape up against in themselves? Which depraved part of themselves would you say?
Well, I do think it's slightly different from the novel. I think in the movie, we get to scrape up against, in a way, our selfishness and our desperation to be seen and appreciated and loved, and just how far that might take you when you've never felt that ever. And I also think there's, it's scraping up against something extremely uncomfortable for us to look at. And that's why it has to happen in a basement, which is the cyclical, sad and horrific abuse of the love of a child. I mean, this is a part of the movie that I don't really think gets spoken about at all, but it is very much about how innocence gets exploited and how desperate we are to be loved and what the sick things that we might do in order to feel that.
Anything to add on that, Luke?
Just the repulsion in me being like, that some might do.
Right. No. Certainly.
Yeah.
Us. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really interesting that people won't talk about the end. They'll talk about that there's a swerve or that there's a this or a reveal. And it's the same with the way that the book was responded to, is that there's this like, oh, Eileen as a character is disgusting, but never would anyone mention the real horror. And it's just such a window into our society and our world, is that like, the thing that's so horrific, people won't take objection to and be like, oh, let's look at that and shed light on that and change that.
Untouchable.
It's like, we're not going to worry about how we could change. The reaction to the book could be like, yeah, we need to do more to protect children. We need to like look at, because this was a true story.
Yeah.
The impetus, and this kid, young man was in prison for life. Like, it wasn't like, let's reform laws around children who were abused. It's like, that young woman was gross.
She didn't take a shower,
So it's a little bit like curious to see how the movie plays. Because,
it's a mirror
no
too.
one's talking about
way.
that yet.
Yeah.
It's like they talk about it as a filmic device, but they haven't talked about it as an issue or a theme. So
yeah.
Seems like an important conversation to spark. We should wrap up, guys. But before I do, can I ask, like, what other projects you've got coming up? I know that this wasn't like a one and done sort of foray into screenwriting for you, Ottessa. Like, I know that the pair of you have other projects in the works. Is there anything you can tell me about?
Well, we had our previous movie, Causeway, which
of course, yeah,
was really fascinating to work on with Lila Neugebauer and Jennifer Lawrence and Brian Tyree Henry starring. And we're working on another project with Will Oldroyd, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
And so
we love Will.
Is that another adaptation of a previously existing thing you've written?
It's not. It's an original story inspired by a true story, and it takes place right here in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, it's the last woman to be convicted of witchcraft during World War II. Yeah, a psychic medium.
Set at Christmas, I hope.
It is a Christmas story.
Yes.
And then we've got another
We've
project
got a bunch of other things in the
that
pipeline.
we just handed in a draft on.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got more coming.
Oh, well, I can't wait, guys. And I can't thank you enough for this conversation today. I've had such a blast chatting with you.
Same. Thank you
so much.
You've been listening to Script Apart. Thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder that if you want to help the show continue to grow, you can join us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/scriptapart or clicking the link in today's show notes. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.